Financial radio show host Dave Ramsey lost everything and went bankrupt when he was only 28 years old. I can remember listening to the radio in my 1995 Toyota Camry and hearing his story for the first time. I was 23 years old and just beginning my real estate investing journey, and I remember being struck that Dave Ramsey had also begun by investing in real estate. So I was determined to learn what had happened and how I could avoid the same fate. In the 1980s, Dave Ramsey was a successful real estate agent and investor. Already at the age of 26, he had accumulated over $4 million worth of property, $3 million worth of debt, and a net worth of over $1 million. In today's dollars, that means he was worth well over $2 million at a very young age. But then, something changed. The US Congress passed a federal banking law that led to a wave of consolidations and buyouts of banks, and the bank that had loaned Dave Ramsey money on some of his properties was also bought out. But rather than the friendly bankers who had liked and trusted Dave enough to give him all those loans, these new bankers had no attachment to him, and all they wanted was their money back. So they called his loans due. In non-financial jargon, this just means that the bankers called up Dave and said, "Hey Dave, we want you to pay back $1.2 million in the next 90 days. And if you don't do that, we're going to foreclose on your properties, we're going to take them, and then whatever money we lose, we're going to come after you personally to take back the rest." That is a call you never want to get. But this is also the point where the lessons from Dave Ramsey's story really started to sink in for me. How is it that a lender could just call your loan due? And what does that even mean? Now, I don't know what Dave Ramsey's actual loan documents said, but in the commercial real estate world, it's actually very common for lenders to have this kind of power. In most cases, it's something called a balloon note. To understand how a balloon note works, let's first look at a typical 30-year mortgage like the one you'd use when you're buying a property to live in. So let's say you buy a property for $250,000 and you put a 20% down payment, which is $50,000. You'd have a loan for $200,000. And if you borrowed that money at 3.5% interest for 30 years, you'd have a payment of $898 per month. Now, the way this works is you make that payment every single month, and in 30 years, your very last payment, you'll owe $0. That loan will be completely paid off. This is also known as a fully amortizing loan. So now let's compare that to a loan with a balloon payment. So everything can look exactly the same. You could have a $250,000 purchase, a $50,000 down payment, and a $200,000 loan. Even the interest rate will be the same, 3.5%. Your payment would be amortizing as if it's going to be a 30-year loan, so $898 per month. But the big difference is your bank might say, in 60 months or 5 years, we want you to pay back whatever you owe at that point. That's your balloon payment. So in this case, at the 60th payment, instead of just $898 per month, you have a total payment of over $180,000. Now, $180,000 all at one time is a lot of money. So you might rightfully ask yourself, how are you supposed to pay back that much money all at one time? Well, there's actually a few different ways. One is that you might go to another bank or this existing bank and refinance that mortgage. So instead of paying $180,000, you just start over again and get a new loan. Or the second way is you might actually sell the property. So hopefully you have some equity in the property, or maybe the property's gone up in value, and so you could resell the property in order to pay that loan off at that point. And then a third way is maybe the hardest way, is that you just save up your own cash and you pay $180,000 off so that the loan is completely paid off and you don't owe any more debt. Most of the time, doing one of these three options is pretty feasible. You can either sell the property or refinance it. Think about today's market, people are doing that all the time. But what happens if it's not that easy? What if you personally have a credit issue? Or what if you lose a job or you don't have enough income to get a new loan and the bank won't loan you the money? Or what if the overall market of banks and lenders has changed? What if nobody's loaning any money? This definitely happened in 2008 and 2009 when all the banks and all the lenders were calling in all their money instead of loaning any money. And what if you go to sell the property and the market price for properties have crashed? What if you have to sell the property for less than what you owe on the property? All of these things have happened. And if this happens to you, when you have a balloon note that comes due, you can not only lose the property itself, but you can lose other properties and other investments and other assets because you personally guarantee that loan. This means that you promise the bank to pay them their money back no matter what. Even if they lose money on that one property, they can come after you and collect on the other investments that you have. So this is where balloon notes, or really any loan where a lender can call the loan due, become really risky. And this is what Dave Ramsey found out in his story. And in Dave Ramsey's case, he didn't just have to pay one loan back. His lenders wanted him to pay $1.2 million worth of loans back in about 90 days. And to add to that problem, Dave also had to either sell or refinance his properties in a very tight lending market that was a result of a lot of banks and savings and loans going out of business during the savings and loan crisis. So the end result for Dave was a lot of stress, a lot of heartache, and a bankruptcy. But you probably know what happened next. Dave learned his lesson. He changed his approach and he decided to rebuild his whole financial fortunes without debt. Because debt was the source of his own downfall, he decided to eliminate debt altogether. And if you listen to any of his radio shows, if you read any of his books, which by the way, I think are very helpful, all of the lessons are about getting out of debt and not using debt, especially to invest in real estate. So this is the story and the lesson that I heard as a brand new real estate investor at 23 years old. On the one hand, I had a very healthy respect for Dave Ramsey's story and his fear of debt. But on the other hand, I'd also heard other investors, people like Robert Kiyosaki, who said that you could invest safely with good debt. What was the right approach? Before I tell you my own approach, I'd love to hear from you in the comment section below. Let me know if you think investing with debt is okay, or if you choose to invest with no debt, more like Dave Ramsey. Ultimately, my business partner and I decided that in order to fix and flip houses early in our career, we would use some commercial bank loans. These were the same type of loans that Dave Ramsey had used that had balloon notes. But thanks to Dave's story and others that we had heard, we had a healthy fear of commercial bank loans and balloon notes. So we only wanted that kind of risk on a couple of properties. So we decided to branch out to other types of financing sources. On one of our first rental properties, we made a $3,000 down payment and then the seller agreed to finance the balance. This means that we didn't have to go to the bank to get a loan. The seller basically became our bank and we made our payments directly to them. For other properties, we found individuals to make us private money loans. We met most of those individuals at real estate investor meetups. They were other real estate investors who just wanted to receive interest passively while we did the work on these properties. For still other properties, we got even more creative by leasing properties with an option to buy them. And so this contract gave us the right to control the income on the property and the price on the property without even having to own it or deal with balloon notes. And then I discovered the strategy now known as house hacking, where I moved into a 4-unit apartment building. I lived in 1 unit, number 2 to be exact, and then I rented the other 3 units out and got a long-term owner-occupant mortgage on the property. If you want to learn even more and go in more depth about these creative financing and acquisition strategies, I'll have a playlist linked in the video description below that you can check out later. The main point was that we had used all of these different financing strategies all the way up until 2007, 2008, 2009, when the Great Recession began and the housing and financial markets crashed. As young investors, the Great Recession was a scary time. We personally knew multiple real estate investors and builders who went out of business and lost everything, primarily because their lenders called their loans due. We also watched nationally as huge companies either went out of business or received bailouts because, guess what? Their lenders had called their loan due and they didn't have enough cash. This was now becoming a theme that was much too common and much too obvious to ignore. So we did financially survive the Great Recession, but I can't say that we came out the other side unscathed. We made a lot of mistakes, like buying properties where we underestimated the repairs, or buying properties in bad locations, or getting really sloppy running the numbers so that we had rental properties with negative cash flow. To pay for these mistakes that we made, we had to eat into our cash reserves for over a year. But as painful as that negative cash flow was, we fortunately had enough cash reserves to handle it. If, on the other hand, if we had had to deal with millions of dollars in negative cash flow, like if our lenders had called our loans due, we would have been sunk too. So the Great Recession gave us a lot of scars and taught us a lot of lessons about how to survive financially going forward. So in order to help you with your real estate business, I want to share 3 of the key lessons I learned right now. The first lesson or takeaway for me is that not all debt is created equal. Now, some of you might make the choice like Dave Ramsey did, and you say, you know what, debt is just risky, period, and I'm going to go cold turkey. I'm not going to borrow any money. And if that's the approach you want to take, I've got respect for that, and there are ways to succeed in real estate. It has its own challenges as well, but I've chosen to take a little bit more of a nuanced view. I think there's some debt that is ideal and is less risky, and there's other debt that's a lot more risky. And it really, for me, comes down to how long of a loan you get. So if you can get a 30-year fixed financing, that is much less risky than something that has a 6-month or a 3-year or a 5-year balloon. The sooner you have to pay that loan back, the more risky it is. So if you can go out and get a traditional mortgage, like the typical one you'd get moving into a house, or the typical traditional mortgage when you have good credit and a full down payment to buy an investment property, you're probably in the lowest risk category for borrowing money. The other thing that I would add to my ideal loan category would be if the loan could be non-recourse, meaning I didn't have to personally guarantee the loan. Now, in most cases with traditional mortgages or ones you would get from a bank, that's almost never going to be the case on smaller residential mortgages. Actually, if you get up to larger mortgages in the commercial world, like $1 million and above, there are a whole category of mortgages where you have non-recourse, meaning if the bank wants to take that property back, they get the property and you would lose any money that you put into the property, but they couldn't go and then get your other properties, your other assets, your other bank accounts. That's what's known as a non-recourse loan. If you could have every loan be non-recourse and be fixed for 30 years instead of having a short time horizon, you would be kind of in the ideal loan category. So to get those ideal loans, you're gonna have to either look at the really big properties, which a lot of us aren't necessarily looking at, or you might have to start looking at more creative financing, seller financing, private financing, and others like that in order to get into the non-recourse type world. Now, there's one other thing you want to be aware of when assessing whether a loan is in the risky category or in the more ideal category, and that's the fine print in your loan documents. Now, sometimes it's very obvious that there's a risk to the loan in the bold print. Like if you have a 60 months from now, you've got to pay a $180,000 balloon payment. That's pretty obvious. You can assess that risk. But very often I found, particularly in commercial mortgages, there's a lot of fine print that has hidden balloons, different ways that if this happens, then the lender can call the loan due. And I went back through one of my commercial mortgages that I've had in the past just to look at a few examples. For example, if me or my business partner died, that would be a way that we would default on our loan because we guaranteed the loan. Now we died. Now they want the loan to be paid off and they could call it all due at one time. Or if we didn't make payments on time on another mortgage that we had, if they found out that there's one other mortgage, whatever the situation was, we didn't make the payments on that mortgage, we now be in default on this mortgage. Or even some very more obscure clauses. There's this adverse change clause where any financial change, so anything happened, if I lost my job, if our net worth went down, if for whatever reason our credit changed, they thought that things had changed for the worse and we were less likely to pay our loan back, they could call our loan due. So it's clauses like that, little sneaky clauses, which make it not surprising at all that in a very bad situation economically, like Dave Ramsey was in, that banks might be able to still call your loan due. So what can you do about this? It's just acknowledging that when you sign that big, thick document with all of that paperwork from the bank, they've hired a team of attorneys, high-powered, smart attorneys, not to help you, the borrower, but to make it as easy as possible for the bank to eliminate every single risk that they can. So just acknowledging that and understanding that when you borrow money from a big bank like that, there are going to be some additional risks that you have compared to either owning the property free and clear, having a seller financing note that maybe you've negotiated personally or a private note, or maybe even if you have enough clout, hiring your own attorney to go through that mortgage and saying, nope, 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 we want to eliminate these clauses. That's usually not possible, but if you can do that, if you have a large enough influence on the lender, that would be a less risky loan to do that in that case. The second big lesson or takeaway that I took from the Great Recession is that you need a big margin of safety. So this helped us in a few different ways. First, we had big cash reserves. You remember me saying that we had negative cash flow for over a year and we had to dig into our cash reserves. If we had not saved a lot of money and had a big cash reserve whenever we were in the good times, we wouldn't have survived during the bad times. Now, how much is enough? That's going to be a personal decision, but at least having 3 months of all of your expenses in a cash bank account is really important. And I would recommend not just having it in a home equity line of credit or some other line of credit, actually having cash in the bank. And then maybe you have an additional line of credit above and beyond that, but having real cash during a downtime, during a tough time, it means a lot and it allows you to have a lot more flexibility. The other way you can have a margin of safety is with the debt or the loan that you're borrowing itself. So make sure you borrow money at a very low loan to value. So if you have a loan at 70% or 60% loan to value, in the case that you need to refinance or sell, it's going to be much easier for you to do that than if you were at 80% or 90%. And the other thing is to make sure you have a margin of safety with your payment. So if your payment's $1,000 a month, don't have your income after all your expenses be $1,100 a month. Building in a nice cushion of cash flow allows you to have some room there in case the rents go down or the expenses go up. You won't automatically have a negative cash flow. The third takeaway or lesson that I have for you is to think outside the box with your financing. Now, if you're just getting started or if you're just doing 2 or 3 properties, thinking outside the box might not be necessary. Because if you have good credit and you have a good down payment and a good job, and you can get a conventional 30-year fixed financing, you're not gonna have to deal with a lot of the risks that I've talked about today. So go ahead and do that. That's one of the reasons I love the small and mighty investor business model. Keeping it small can sometimes avoid a lot of the risks that happen when you grow and you get really big. The challenge for some of you is if you're like me, if you were in a situation where you don't have a job. I was an entrepreneur from the very beginning. Dave Ramsey was the same way. Or if you're growing beyond, eventually the traditional loan system will cut you off. Maybe it's 5 loans, maybe it's 10 loans. But eventually, if you get more than that, you're gonna have to start getting in the commercial real estate world. And so my advice for you there is just to think outside the box, to look at all of your choices. Because remember, all of the financing isn't created equal. So be very careful about the terms that you agree to. Be very careful about what type of financing you get. I like a lot of creative financing, seller financing. It's a little bit harder because you have to negotiate that and you have to work harder to find those kinds of deals. But there's also a lot of what's called non-qualifying financing out there. I'm gonna have a link below to a page on my website where I have a list of different investor lenders who have 30-year fixed financing products that are relatively new to the market and really interesting products. So check those out, do your shopping, look around, think outside the box to make sure you get an investing loan that makes sense for you, that reduces your risk so that you can survive over the long run. So you'll still be here to talk about it 10 years from now, 15 years from now, which is really the ultimate goal of investing in the first place. This is like running a long marathon race. If you actually don't finish the race, if you lose the money before you finish the race, what's the point? If you liked this video and found it helpful, please hit the like button to help me spread the word on YouTube. And if you'd like to learn more about financing of real estate, I think you'll like my next video, which is actually a playlist with some of my best content on how to finance real estate, how to use creative financing or alternative sources like seller financing or lease options, and a lot more. So check out that link. It'll be either above me here somewhere and also in the video description below. You've been watching Coach Carson TV, which is all about helping you get out of the financial grind so you can do more of what matters. My name is Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach, and I'll see you next time.